Gentlemen, thank you for being here. I promise never to be late to a committee meeting again because you're put at the end of the line. Anyway, welcome. Thank you for your stamina. Thank you for your testimony today. And I want to pick up where Ms. Ocasio-Cortez left off with you, Mr. Corbett. I'll start with you, Mr. Diamond, because you and I have had this conversation a little bit about capital. And I agree with your analogy when you talked about, when you got the money, repair the roof. And I'm going to say, when you got the money, build the capital. So I do want to give you a chance to talk to me about capital, but I'm going to be a hard sell because I've been through the REITs, I've been through the savings and loans, I've been through the oil and gas banks failing, and I've been through what we went through in 2008, and Mr. Foster described it perfectly. What we were contending with and what you were contending with. So talk to me about capital for a second, and then I've got some questions about cryptocurrencies, gap insurance, and maybe marijuana and banking.
Folks mentioned there are many capital measures now, so we're constrained by this whole set. But you have to understand that CCAR, which constrains a lot of the banks, has a capital buffer in it. That's what the stress test is. It shows how much capital you retain after that stress. And I've mentioned that in the system, today, all those stress tests would cost $100 billion. It would never happen that way, and it would never cost like that. But the system has almost well over $1 trillion of capital, $2 trillion of capital. And so there's a lot of capital, and we double, triple count it. That's all it is. No one's against the concept.
I think all of us would be willing to sit down and talk to you about where you think it's double or triple counted. But again, as kind of a depression baby, I'm going to be a very hard sell to chip away at that capital in these good times, because we know if we have another cycle, we're going to have bad times, and it's going to get gobbled up if you continue to do the business you've been doing and extending loans and things like that. So we know that. I do want to talk about 10 years after. And Mr. Solomon, I feel bad. You always are sort of left out, you guys at the end of the table. We did TARP. We did TARP as kind of an emergency.
We want Lloyd back.
Okay. We did TARP as kind of an emergency measure. We did the Recovery Act. March 9th, and there's a whole story behind that, 2009, the stock market turned, and then we did Dodd-Frank. Now, my question to you, if Mr. Kasten would move, you come late, you get into trouble here. My question to you with respect to Dodd-Frank, would you say that the system, the overall system, and Goldman Sachs became part of the system during that period of time, is safer and more sound than it was before 2008?
Yes, I agree that the system is safer and is more safe and more sound than it was in 2008, and Dodd-Frank has made a meaningful contribution to that.
Okay, Mr. Scharf.
Yes, absolutely.
Mr. O'Hanley.
Yes, it is safer and sounder.
Mr. Moynihan, and you and I can have a conversation about capital some other time, but yes, unless you want to jump in now.
The system is more safe and more sound, and the key point that you pointed out is everybody at this table is in it. In 2007, everybody at this table was not in it, and that was one of the major problems we faced.
Mr. Gorman?
Yes, it's dramatically safer and sounder.
Mr. Diamond?
It's not even close. It's multiples.
Mr. Corbett?
Without a doubt.
One thing, and Mr. Diamond, when you and I met with several of you over the last few weeks, and hopefully this isn't proprietary information, or I'll just ask it and you can say it, but I mean, how much money actually is processed and intermediated through Chase on a daily basis, worldwide?
About $8 trillion.
And Mr. Corbett?
Probably somewhere about $5 trillion.
Mr. Gorman, you're not really in quite the intermediation business. But
We're not in that business.
Mr. Moynihan?
I think it's around 3 or 4.
Mr. O'Hanley?
In our custody and administration business, about $1 trillion a day.
Mr. Scharf?
I think it's about $1.5 trillion.
Mr. Solomon?
We're not really in the business, in that business.
I just want to thank you all for your stamina today, for being here. Obviously, we went through some very difficult times. Don't want to go through them again, but appreciate your testimony today, and I yield back.